The first thing that you want to consider when you're choosing your horse fencing is safety. I think it's the most important thing to consider. You want to make sure your horses are safely contained and that the fencing is not going to cause any damage to your horses. You want to look for a fencing that's going to be easily visible. Hi, my name is Willow Hand, and these are my 5 top tips to consider when you're choosing horse fencing. I think the first and most important thing to consider when you're choosing a new fence for your horse is safety. You want to make sure that your horse is not going to get injured or have any accidents due to fencing or because of the paddocks. That's, I think, the most important priority. When you're choosing a fence, you want to make sure that it's going to be strong, sturdy, visible so that the horses can see it and not run through it, and flexible, and you want to make sure it's not going to splinter or break in case of any impacts. The second most important thing to consider about your new fencing is maintenance. You want to make sure that your fence is not going to be falling apart, breaking down, or constantly being an issue. You want to have a fence that you set it and forget it, that's going to keep your horses safe and contained for many years to come. The third most important factor, in my opinion, is pricing. So you want to think about not just the pricing on the day that you're paying for the fence, but the price the third most important factor that you want to consider when you're buying your fencing is pricing. And I'm not talking just now in the meantime, I'm talking the lifetime of the fence. You want to factor in the maintenance costs. How quickly are you going to be replacing the fence? And is it going to last a lifetime on your farm? So traditional wood fencing needs to be replaced every 5 to 7 years, whereas if you invest in a quality product like Derby, you'll never have to worry about your fencing again. My fourth tip is worry about your layout. Walk it 100 times. If this is a fence that you're installing for the first time, make sure you're happy with where your fencing is going to be, because it's going to be there for a lifetime. I spent so much time walking my property, thinking about where I wanted gates, where I wanted everything to be, and you can never have too many gates. So make sure you have easy access to move trucks or anything into pastures in case of an emergency, because you never know when you're going to need it. And the fifth factor to consider is design. This is the fun one, but still very important. You want to make sure that your fence is going to match the overall aesthetic of your property now and for many years to come. This is a fence that you're never going to have to worry about changing, so you want to make sure that you're going to choose a color and design style that's going to last with your property now and 20 years into the future. So make sure that you choose carefully. So why is cheapest per foot a super common trap that people fall into? It can be super tempting when you're choosing your fencing to go for whatever the cheapest option is on installation day, but that is a very common mistake that can end up costing you thousands of dollars more in the long run. When you are choosing a fence, it's really easy to just choose wood or PVC, something that's going to be really cheap in upfront cost. When you're choosing your fence, it's really tempting to choose wood because it's so much cheaper up front, but you are going to pay for that mistake in the long run. Choosing a material like HDPE is going to stand the test of time, and you're going to save thousands of dollars on maintenance, on early replacement, and on all the safety and vet bills that you could be accumulating. I've dealt with 5-figure vet bills, and it's not something you want to deal with over silly accidents. So it's always better to just choose. Choosing the cheapest cost per foot is a trap that so many horse owners fall into, because it can be super tempting to just choose the cheapest upfront cost for your fencing, but it is detrimental in the long run to go with an option like wood or vinyl for your horses. And when you're choosing your horse fencing, you have to really keep in mind the cost not only today, but in the long run. What is it going to look like in 5 to 10 years when you have to replace that fencing much sooner than you should? And when you have day-to-day broken boards, broken posts, horses getting out, and all sorts of damages, not to mention the potential vet bills that you could be faced with if your horse gets injured or gets out from the fencing. Not to mention the vet bills that you're going to be faced with if your horse runs into the fence, gets injured by splintering or cracking, or if the fence breaks and your horse gets out and gets injured. It's a risk that's not worth taking, and that's why HDPE is often the cheapest option in the long run. My name is Willow Hand, and we're here on my farm in Wellington, Florida, and these are my favorite fencing features. So this is my brand new fence that I just had installed a few months ago, and I've been blown away by the amazing quality of Derby fencing. I've installed several fences on other properties, and this is absolutely my favorite fencing, and this is why. So I love when I installed it. The height is just so nice. You can adjust the height quite a bit. They recommend installing it anywhere from 4 to 6 feet high, and it was really easy to set a really nice height for it. I chose the 4-rail style, which I feel gives really, really good security, and it gives me a lot of confidence that horses aren't going to get a leg or a head or something silly stuck into the fencing. Something else that I love about this fencing is how flexible everything is. So, you know, the fencing is super, super safe because if a horse has any impact with it, it's never going to break, it's never going to splinter, it's never going to hurt the horse in any way. It's completely bendable and gives to provide a really safe option. I also love the HDPE material is super sturdy and durable and stays really nice and clean. The fence has been up for 6 months now in Wellington, and there's really no staining on it. It looks just as good as it did the first day that we installed it. And yeah, so those are my favorite parts of my new fence. My name is Willow Hand, and right now we're on my farm in Wellington, Florida, talking all about Derby fencing and the differences between choosing a 3-rail versus a 4-rail fence design. So I've chosen 4-rail here for my property, and there's a lot of different reasons why you would choose 3-rail versus 4-rail, different use cases and different factors. When you're choosing fencing for horses, either 3-rail or 4-rail is an appropriate choice. It just kind of depends on your specific situations. You know, if you have ponies or smaller horses or animals or foals or anything that's smaller, then I think the 4-rail is a lot better because the horses aren't able to sneak through it or get caught in it as easily since you have a much smaller space in between each rail, whereas the 3-rail gives, you know, a lot more space to pass through. I think the 4-rail is really, really nice as well for larger horses and stallions even, because you can build the fence even a lot higher than you could with a traditional 3-rail. You know, I have my fencing set at around 4.5 to 5 feet, but you can go even as high as 6 foot with the 4-rail fencing, which is really nice. If you're doing anything with cattle, then you definitely want to go with a 4-rail because the 3-rail gives a bigger space that cows can kind of get their head stuck in, and they may be able to, you know, get entangled that way. So 4-rail is really good for that. But if you're looking for a more budget-friendly option, then 3-rail is a phenomenal choice for horses as well. You know, 3-rail is also really great for around arenas or maybe a perimeter fencing where animals aren't going to be up on it constantly. So, you know, it really just depends on your budget and your needs, what the best option for you is. So Derby fencing comes in a multitude of colors, and it's one of the most important decisions you make for your fence to choose the right one for your property and your aesthetics. So some of the colors that they offer are white, like what I have. You have black, you have gray, you have different shades of woods, weathered, and cedar. And they even have a hunter green. So there's so many different options to customize towards what you want for your property. I'm down here in Wellington, and I wanted this whole property to just feel like a tropical oasis. I wanted it to feel kind of Hamptons meet south of France, but just have a really bright, vibrant pastel feel to it. And the white fencing just fit in perfectly for that. My barn is about to start construction, and everything's going to be really pretty pastels, baby blue, creams, and just light, bright tones. So I was so excited to have a fencing option that goes in white, that's going to stay white, that is not going to splinter and crack and stain like traditional PVC does. So that's what really sets Derby apart. And, you know, just make sure that you choose the best color for your property. Hi, my name is Willow Hand, and right now I'm on my farm in Wellington, and I cannot wait to show you guys my beautiful driveway that I just redid all with Derby fencing. It turned out so beautiful. So this is one of the parts of my property that I was most excited about. I wanted to have a really special, breathtaking entrance, and I feel like we've absolutely nailed that with Derby fencing. I chose the bright white 4-rail fencing, and I have a little paddock over on this side, and then I have my riding / turnout / jumping field over here on the other side. And I wanted a fence that really popped and stood out and enhanced the entrance of the property. And I feel like we got that so many times over with the Derby fencing. I mean, it's just so breathtaking. Right when you pull into the property, it just screams high end and it's just so nice. So what is the safest fence height for horses? There's so much debate and variation between what different people do, but what is actually the safest height for horses? So there is so many factors to consider when you're trying to decide what height your fence should be for your farm. Factors including, what breed of horse do you have? What size of horses are you having? Do you have little ponies or do you have 17-hand warm blood? There's a huge difference. And what are the temperaments of your horses? What are you using the pastures for? And so many people ask, what is the correct height to install your fencing at? And there's so many different variables that go into what height your fencing should be and things to consider. Like, for example, what kind of horses do you have on your property? What's the temperament of your horses? And what's going to be the use of that fencing? So, there's a really big difference between containing little ponies and 17-hand warm bloods or thoroughbreds or any of the different breeds. So, obviously the bigger the horse is, the higher the horse fencing should be. If you're containing stallions, you want something taller. If you're containing race horses or any horses that are really, really over energetic or really high jumpers, then you want something taller. As a really good rule of thumb though, we recommend any normal horse fencing be about 4.5 to 5 feet. If you have ponies or something smaller, you can get away with a 3.5 to 4 foot fence. And then, if you have really high energy performance sport horses or stallions, you can go even up to 6 foot if you feel like that's necessary to contain your horses. Smaller paddocks for more active breeds, build the fence up if it gives you peace of mind. But, a really good solid height is that 4.5 to 5 foot range. I think that's kind of where we're at, due to the different terrains, it kind of fluctuates a little bit in that 4.5 to 5 foot range on my property, but I feel like it's such a really nice height. I have 17-hand warm bloods and I feel super safe and confident with them in this fencing at this height. So one of the most common questions that we see is, what should the post spacing be for Derby fencing? And one of the most important parts of installation is how accurate you are able to get the posts into the ground. So they always recommend doing 8 foot on center for all of the post spacing. And that's going to be one of the most crucial points for success when you're installing the fence or whoever you're using to install it. So the reason that you use 8 foot on center is because each board comes in 16 foot stretches. And so if you are dead on it 8 foot on center with your posts, there's room for the posts to be able to bend and flex throughout the seasons and with the horses interacting with it. And you're never going to have a post or a rail pop out of the post. So that's the safest and most secure way to install your fence. So 8 foot spacings on center is always the best way. So how wide do you want your pasture gates to be? That's a great question and something that needs to be considered when you're designing your fence layout. So this gate right here is 4 foot, and that's typically the minimum size that you want any of your gates to be. You can safely get a horse in and out of this, and it's a really handy size to have in tighter spaces, or if you're, if you don't need extra room, it's a really, really handy size to move horses in and out of. But I always recommend going larger than you think you're ever going to need, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know when there's a piece of machinery that you need to get in to access something, or, things just come up on a farm. So I think having lots of gates in your plans and making sure that they're going to be wide enough for your needs. Another thing to think about is any machinery that you may need to move in or out of the pasture at any point. If you're going to have a mower, you want to make sure that you're going to be able to get that in there. And then you always want some sort of emergency way to get a larger vehicle, a truck and trailer or something like that into any area of your property in case a horse ever goes down or has an injury and a vet needs to be able to get out there or bring any special emergency equipment. So make sure you always go a little bit bigger than you think, but 4 foot is a really good start. And then, 6 to 8 foot is also a really comfortable size as well. One of the most important questions that your installer needs to be able to answer is how deep do you need to set your posts? And the answer to that is you need to be able to set all of your posts at a minimum of 30 inches below grade. So that means that wherever the ground is at, the bottom of your post needs to be 30 inches down at a minimum. You know, the deeper that you're able to get your post, the better, and the stronger that your fence will be in the long run. They always recommend as well in colder climates where there's more freezing and thawing of the ground, deeper is always going to provide a much stronger fencing. So then also when you're installing your post, you want to be thinking about concrete. Do you need to be installing concrete for every post? And the answer to that is, again, yes. It is a very good idea to make sure that your fencing has concrete in every post to ensure that it's going to be as strong as possible. Something really cool about the Derby fencing design is that it actually has a hole in the bottom of each post to really help the concrete lock in and make it as strong as physically possible. So you definitely want to make sure to utilize that technology when your fencing is going in. Hi, my name is Willow Hand, and today we're on my property in Wellington to discuss the difference between choosing Derby's HDPE fencing and traditional wood. So behind me I have both options. I bought this property about a year ago, and when I bought it, the whole property was fenced with this lovely traditional wood fence, and it had never been painted or stained or anything. And believe it or not, this fence is only, I believe, 5 years old. So fencing that is made out of wood down here breaks down so quickly. It's splintering, it's breaking. The posts are like completely rotten through. I have so many safety issues with this fence over here, and it's only been 5 years. It really just doesn't last very long at all. And then when you compare that to Derby's HDPE fencing, it's just night and day the difference. So over here, we have a beautiful 4-rail fence that is virtually maintenance free. There's no painting required. There's no topical, anything that you have to put on the fence. The rails do not break. They don't splinter. They don't crack. They give on impact to horses. So they're really, really easy to maintain. And this fence is going to last a lifetime. So that's kind of the difference. You know, when you're looking at choosing a fence, it might seem tempting to go the cheaper route, which is wood up front, but you're going to pay for it in the future. I mean, there's just so much maintenance, stress, and headache that you're going to have to deal with, plus premature replacement. So definitely think about both options when you're choosing your fencing, and I always recommend to go with Derby's HDPE. Hi, my name is Willow Hand, and right now we're on my new farm in Wellington, Florida, and I'm here to talk all about my brand new Derby fence. So I shouldn't actually say brand new. We had the fence installed about 6 months ago, and it has been the best decision that I've ever made for this farm. It has totally changed the whole feeling of the property, and it just blown all my expectations out of the water. So I bought this place about a year ago, and it was not originally an equine property. It needed a lot of work with both the house and also the land and the property. So, you know, there's so many things to get the property ready to bring the horses home. And one of the most important decisions that I think we made in that process was definitely the fencing. I spent so many months researching all of the different fencing options because I wanted to make sure that I had the safest, absolutely best choice I could possibly find for my horses. And, you know, their safety is always my top priority. And I'm really big on turning horses out and kind of letting them be horses. But I think that, you know, it's always important to make sure that they have a safe environment. So when I was researching options, you know, I came across wood, I came across PVC, I came across some of the competitors' steel fencing. And, you know, I just didn't really feel like any of the options resonated or really felt like they had the whole package like the Derby fencing does. Derby fencing is the HDPE material, which is really safe for horses because it bends and flexes on impact. So, you know, if you have a horse that's a little bit rambunctious and they start running around and accidentally make contact with the fencing anywhere, it's not going to break, it's not going to splinter or crack or hurt or impale the horse in any way. The horse is going to be really safe when they hit it. It also has really good visibility, so that's really important when you have horses turn out and running around, that they can see the fence really, really well. And you know, it's also virtually maintenance free, which is so incredible. You know, PVC and wood, I mean, wood needs to be repainted almost yearly. Back on the Nashville farm, I have a wood fence that was only put in 5 years ago, and already I've had to paint it 4 times, I think. And it's already, I mean, posts are rotting, rails are sagging, it's breaking constantly. It's already a maintenance nightmare, and it's only been 5 years. So I'm really excited to see how the Derby fence ages in the long term, but I just think it's gonna be so much easier to take care of. You know, and then I was looking at the PVC options, which give a little bit more of the look that I was going for. But, you know, they're just really not safe or suitable for horses. They're not tall enough for horses. They're brittle, they crack, they stain, and they're just really not a good choice. Then, you know, we have the steel options, and with them, they rust, they break down. You know, it's just a powder coating that's on the edge of the steel, which flakes and comes off. So it's really not very durable in the long run either. You know, so that's kind of why I originally landed on the Derby fence, and it's just blown my expectations out of the water. You know, when it finally arrived, we started installing it, it totally changed the whole aesthetic of the property. I went with the 4-rail in white, which is my favorite color. The whole property down here is really light, bright, and airy. And so I thought that it fit the vibe really well. There's a lot of different color options though. It was actually kind of hard to choose. I really loved some of the wood options as well. They had like a weathered wood that was really pretty, the classic black. They have, you know, they even have a hunter green, which I thought was really fun. If I had a little bit different of a feeling going on, I think I would have gone with the green because I think it looks really good. But, you know, there's just so many cool options with it that you can really customize it specifically to your needs. Installation was so fast and easy. I was, you know, just a little bit curious how it would go in, and it was just as easy or even easier to, honestly, much easier to install than a traditional wood fence even would be. You know, there's no nailing involved. All you have to do is measure the posts out well, install the posts, and then the rails just slide and lock right in, which is so great and easy. It also makes replacement really easy. If somehow a tree or something falls on the fence and rails do get damaged, you can just slide the rail out and put a new one in. So that makes things really, really simple. You know, overall, I just feel like it was such a great addition to the property. And, you know, it's been 6 months living with it, and it's just great. I have no stress or worries at all when I turn my horses out on it. I know I have big horses. I have 17 hand warm bloods, and, you know, the fence is so much higher than any normal traditional fence that I've seen. You know, I have it installed at about 5 foot everywhere, which just gives me so much peace of mind that the horses are safely contained, and everything's just great with it. You know, we've got gates everywhere. You know, that's always one thing that I always say whenever you're laying out a new fence is plan way more gates than you think you're going to need, because nothing's more annoying than when you're walking around with horses or with hay or just moving things around and you can't fit something through a gate, or there's not a gate and you have to walk like all the way around. That always drives me crazy. So, you know, some tips for when you're installing yours: make sure you use lots of gates. You know, walk your layouts over and over and over and over again to make sure that you're really happy with where everything's going to be. When I was planning all of mine out, I used, I didn't have it on, but I used like an electric fence, like a hotline, and just little temporary step-in posts to kind of string everything up so that I would see exactly where I put everything. And I did kind of an interesting design here. I wanted to really maximize every inch of space that we had on the property. It's only a 2.5 acre farm, so, you know, it's just a winter base, so we didn't need a ton of land, but I want to use every little bit of grass that I possibly can for the horses. And so I did a really interesting curb design in this pasture that I'm in right now. And it was really cool. You can do some really cool like radiuses with the Derby fence, since they're a little bit flexible, that are really, really special. I haven't seen any other type of fencing that allow you to do those cool designs like that. So it turned out really, really special. And the whole, the front field has some really pretty curves around the edges as well. I always think curves are a little bit, a little safer and a little less intimidating for horses, especially in smaller paddocks. You know, it's always awkward when a horse is really running as hard as they can and then they come to a hard corner and they've got to stop, because sometimes there's not enough time to really get a full stop in there. So, you know, it's always better for things to be a little bit more continuous. Yeah, but I love the 4-board design. I felt like that was definitely the right choice. You know, they have a 3-board option as well, and they even do 2 boards and single board for if you're doing around an arena or somewhere where you don't need that much, you know, kind of coverage, I would say. But I think the 4-board is just perfect for pasture, especially for bigger horses. It just gives that really strong, sturdy feel. Yeah, my name is Willow Hand, and I am absolutely thrilled with my new Derby fence.